Ladies and gentlemen, Capital G back at it with Volo Guide to Monsters, an especially popular commander coming out of the Forgotten Realms. Why is he so popular? Well, other than that epic beard and mustache that he's rocking, he's in Simic colors, so automatically popular for that reason alone. Blue, green, and 2 gives us a 3/2 human wizard that says that whenever you cast a creature spell that does not share a creature type with another creature you control on the battlefield or in your graveyard, copy the spell. So what ends up happening, and let's use Elvish Mystic as our example, and these are my Elvish Mystics. You cast your Elvish Mystic. Are there any other Elf Druids on the board? No. You get a token copy. The token, the copied spell resolves first as a token, and then the real deal comes onto the battlefield. Pretty sweet, right? Couple of rules things to clean up before we jump into the deck tech. Volo himself is a human wizard, so you can run other human wizards in your deck, but you're not going to be able to double up on their effect. Just saying, because Volo will count himself. So that's point number 1. Point number 2, a couple of cards that are actually very popular in the deck, even though they don't actually interact with them properly. Let's start with Doubling Season. And let's go back to our Elvish Mystic example. The copied Elvish Mystic spell will enter the battlefield, but it's not created, it just resolves and is a token. It doesn't actually create a token, so this doesn't actually trigger Doubling Season. You only get 1 Elvish Mystic token, not 2. The other thing we want to resolve is Guardian Project, which I almost put into the deck until I realized that, hey, because the token enters the battlefield first and it does not trigger Guardian Project, when the real deal hits the battlefield, well, it's not going to trigger Guardian Project either. There's already a creature of the same name on the battlefield. So these 2 cards, do not run them in your Volo deck unless you have other synergies. That makes sense with what you're doing. So what lots of people are doing with Volo, of course, is trying to diversify their creature types as much as possible. And that's exactly what I've done. I do have one other human wizard in the deck, which I found useful enough to run in spite of the fact that I cannot double up on the trigger. But everything else is completely different creature types. No repetition. So let us go into the deck. I am running a snow sub-theme in the deck, actually. So that's kind of what makes my version a little different from what you might have already seen earlier this week from EDH Rec. So Cold Steel Heart, of course, is a snow artifact. We can choose what color of mana this can produce. We are running Crystal Shard. It's a great artifact. We can either pay 3 generic mana or a single blue to be able to return target creature to its owner's hand unless its controller pays 1. Now, if our opponents are tapped out, we could disrupt their tempo a little bit with this. We can also probably curry some political favor as well. But this is primarily so that we can return our own creatures to our hand, because we can target our own creature, not pay the 1, bring it right back to our hand, ready to cast again. Asika Chariot, 4 mana for this 4/4 vehicle. What's cool about this is that it enters the battlefield with 2 green cracked creature tokens. So whenever this attacks, we can create a token that's a copy of a token we control. So any other creature that we've already gotten a token copy of off of Volo's ability, we can copy that again. The deck does run 1 other cat, so as long as those cat tokens are in play, I would not be able to double up on the other cat that I am running. But we're not going to see every card every game, so I think it's worth the double up here. Lifecrafter's Bestiary, great flavor add here because of course Volo is going to have a Bestiary. Get a free scry on our upkeep, and whenever we cast a creature spell, we can pay an additional green mana to draw a card. Portal of Sanctuary is here for the exact same reason as the Crystal Shard. This can only interact with our creatures, and it only works on our turn. although this can be used at instant speed during our turn. Replicating Ring, another snow artifact for the sub-theme. Taps for a mana of any color. If we somehow get to 8 or more counters on it, we get a whole bunch of copies of the Replicating Ring. Simic Signet is here for our colors, of course. Soul Ring with Talisman of Curiosity. We are running the Great Henge because we're casting a lot of creature spells. And super important tech for Volo is Twinning Staff. Because we have our Volo on the battlefield, we cast our Elvish Mystic. Volo copies the spell. Twinning Staff copies it again. 3 Elvish Mystics instead of only 2. Now, I am not actually running Elvish Mystic in this deck, for the record. It's just a nice straightforward example to explain how the card works. What creatures am I running? Let's start with Abominable Treefolk. 4 mana for this snow creature with trample, and its power and toughness is equal to the number of snow permanents we control. So this can be a big creature for us to turn sideways with, especially when we have 2 of them. Also a really cool enter the battlefield ability here. When this enters the battlefield, we get to tap a creature an opponent controls, and that creature does not untap during its controller's next untap step. Aggressive Mammoth. Most of our creatures don't have trample, actually. So having Aggressive Mammoth out means that all our creatures can have trample, and it's a 6 mana 8/8. Or 2 6 mana 8/8s. Amphin Mutineer enters the battlefield. We get to exile an opponent's non-salamander creature. They get a 4/3 salamander warrior token. Chances are what we're exiling is far worse than what we're giving them. And of course, with Amphin Mutineer, we can actually cast it for its Encore cost. It is a cast, not an activated ability. Or is it? Let's just double check here. Activate only as a sorcery. No, so in fact, Encore is an activated ability. So we can cast it, get rid of 2 things. Later in the game, we can Encore it and get rid of up to 3 things. Or depending on the size of your pod. Clever Impersonator is a shapeshifter. At least it is when it's on the stack. So we can have this enter the battlefield as a copy of any non-land permanent on the battlefield. Sweet. And the cool thing about this is that if you're running other shapeshifters, as long as they are not in your graveyard, they're not necessarily shapeshifters. So this is the only one that I am running. There are other clone effects with different types. There are also other clone effects that are shapeshifters. But this is the only one I chose to run today. Fairy Artisans we can do a lot of interesting stuff with. 4 mana for this 2/2 flyer that says that whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, we get a token that's a copy of it. And then we exile any other tokens that we have that were created with the Fairy Artisans. So every time our opponents play a creature, we get an artifact copy of it. Of course, it's our only Fairy Artificers, so with Volo out, that means we get 2 Fairy Artisans, which means we get 2 of whatever our opponents cast. Farhaven Elf is the Elf Druid I am running because it lets us go get some basics. It's good before we cast Volo because then it gives us the mana to cast him. It's good after we have Volo in play because it gets us 2 basics for the price of 1. Garruk's Pack Leader, 5 mana for this 4/4 that says whenever another creature with power 3 or greater enters the battlefield under our control, we may draw a card. We're going to actually have a lot of card momentum in this deck, which is pretty sweet. Genesis gives us a little bit of recursion out of the graveyard. This is better off in our graveyard than on the battlefield, but once it gets to our graveyard, on each of our upkeeps we can pay 3 mana to return a creature card from our graveyard to our hand. Icefang Coatl is the snake that I decided to go with. It's a snow creature. It has flash, so if somebody attacks us, we have Volo out, we can actually pay 2 mana and flash out 2 of these. Draws us a card when it enters the battlefield, and has Death Touch as long as we control at least 3 other snow permanents, which we will likely have. Breaker Kraken is another excellent snow synergy here. It looks like a 12 mana creature, but For every snowland we control, its mana cost is reduced by 1. So we're casting this usually for 5, 6, 7, probably depending on the stage of the game. When this enters the battlefield, artifacts and creatures an opponent controls does not untap during that player's next untap step. Lock our opponents down, and hey, we have an 8/8. Not going to mess around with that. We can also return 3 snowlands we control to our owner's hand to return the Kraken to its owner's hand. So we have a way of bouncing this back to our hand if need be. Junkwinder, excellent card for this deck. 7 mana for this 5/6 Serpent. Has affinity for tokens. So the more tokens we have on the battlefield, the cheaper this is. And whenever a token enters the battlefield under our control, we can tap an on-land permanent an opponent controls and it does not untap. So we have a little bit of a sub-team here on, tapping down our opponent's board and keeping them frozen. Keeper of Fables is the actual cat that I'm running. It says here that whenever one or more non-human creatures we control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. As you may have noticed already, we are running a lot of non-humans. Karuga the Macro Sage. So, yes, Volo does copy other legendary creature spells. No, we don't get to keep both the token and the original Karuga. That's okay. Because the reason we're running Karuga, this dinosaur hippo, is that when it enters the battlefield, draw a card for each other permanent we control with converted mana cost 3 or greater. Token copies of a creature. Let's go back and use Keeper of Fables as our example. 5 mana value creature. So let's just say we have Volo and we have the 2 Keeper of Fables. We cast Karuga, copy it. The copy resolves first. Will draw us 3 cards because even the token of Keeper of Fables has that mana value of 5. Even though it's only a token, it still maintains the mana value because it's a direct copy of the creature. The real deal will come in and draw us another 3 cards for those creatures. The token will disappear immediately because of the legendary roll. That's fine. We get a lot of card draw value off of Karuga in this deck. Speaking of card draw value, Loyal Drake. Imagine having a couple of these out with our commander. At the beginning of combat on our turn, if we control our commander, draw a card. So, the longer we have both the Loyal Drakes out, along with our Volo, the more value we get. Mana War comes into play, return a creature to its owner's hand. So we can, in fact, cast our Mana War, get a copy of it. The copy will bounce something. When the real deal comes in, it can bounce another creature or it can bounce itself so that we can cast it again in a future turn. We can do a lot of board control with this. Manogorger Hydra, huge trampling creature, especially if we get 2 of them out early and our opponents don't respond to them. Every time they cast a spell, our Hydras get +1/+1. And once they become, 8, 8, 9, 9, 10, 10, we're smashing face and we're not really worried about the crackback. Mercurial Pretender, another shapeshifter. 5 mana. It enters the battlefield as a copy of any creature we control, except it gains the ability to return to our hand by paying blue, blue, and 2. And the nice thing about this is that once the Pretender enters the battlefield, let's say it copies our Elvish Mystic. So, let's say they both copy our Elvish Mystic. Both the original and the copied spell come in. They're both Elvish Mystics. We return the original to our hand. When we cast this again, it's still a shapeshifter, not an elf druid. So we get 2 copies again. That makes sense? I hope it did. I'm trying. Mesmeric Sliver. Here's a spicy little ad. All slivers have, when this permanent comes into play, you may Fate Seal 1. If there is another Sliver deck at the table, or somebody is running Sliver Queen, do not put this into play. Otherwise, go nuts. Because what will happen here is that whenever the token or the original come into play, we get to look at the top card of an opponent's library, and if we don't like it, we can throw it to the bottom. Merc Fiend Liege. This is going to be sweet to have at least a copy of. 5 mana for this 4/4 horror. Other green creatures we control get +1/+1. Other blue creatures we control get +1/+1. And during each of the player's untap step, we get to untap all our creatures. Very, very sweet. We're running our Mirror Ball, the Mirror Battlesphere. The only construct in the deck, the only mirror in the deck. And why not? 7 mana to get 2 of these Battlespheres and 8 tokens. It's an old school finisher, but when you have 2 of them out and you're swinging with both of them and tapping down 8 other tokens, sure, you're going to deal a lot of damage with this thing. Nest Invader, an Eldrazi drone. It's a 2/2 for 2 that says that when it enters the battlefield, we get to create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn token. We can sack those tokens for colorless mana. The Ornithopter of Paradise. Taps for any of our colors. Overbeing of Myth. This is a sweet one to have 2 of. Very color heavy casting cost. 5 mana in any combination of red or blue. Its power and toughness is equal to the number of cards in our hand, and as you can see, we have really good card momentum. So we're always going to have a bunch of cards in our hand. And if our card draw is not enough for whatever reason, then at the beginning of our draw step, we get to draw a card with each Overbeing of Myth. So we get extra card draws just by having them survive around the table. Pathbreaker Ibex. 6 mana for this 3/3 goat. The goat of the deck. When this attacks, creatures you control gain trample and +X/+X, where X is the greatest power amongst creatures we control. And if we're attacking with 2 of them, well, I believe the term we're going to use here is double-double. Prosperous Innkeeper. When this enters the battlefield, we get a treasure token. So we can get 1 or 2 treasures depending on the stage of the game. And whenever another creature enters the battlefield under our control, we gain a life. So this can help insulate our life total a little bit. Rhymefeather Owl. It's a big bird. 7 mana for this bird with flying. Its power and toughness are each equal to the number of snow permanents in play. So if you have a couple of these that we're turning sideways with, sure. And on top of that, we can actually pay a snow and 1 generic to put an ice counter on a permanent. Permanents with ice counters on them are snow. Risen Reef is the elemental I chose to go with. Early game value. Blue, green, and a generic for this elemental. When this or another elemental enters the battlefield under our control, we get to look at the top card of our library, put it onto the battlefield if it's a land, put it into our hand if it's not. And the nice thing is the way it's timed. You cast it, you get your copy resolves, 1 trigger. Original resolves, 2 more triggers. Scoot Swarm. I hate this card. It's obnoxious. But I cannot deny how good it is here. Every time we play a land, we get another insect token or another Scoot Swarm, depending on how many lands we have at that point of the game. And with Volo out, we actually start with 2 of them. So, again, super obnoxious card. I would prefer not to play with it, but I can't deny that it has a home here. Sad Robot, a Golem. Go get some basics. Chances are we're going to have our Volo out before we cast our Solemn, so we're always going to get 2 basics with this. And of course, when they die, we draw our cards. Spark Double. It's an illusion. Can copy any creature or planeswalker. It enters with an additional +1/+1 counter if it's a creature, and it enters with an additional loyalty counter if it's a planeswalker. If the permanent is legendary, the Spark Double is not, so we can actually copy Volo with this. So imagine having 3 Volos on the battlefield thanks to Spark Double. Go nuts. Tend to Shoot Dryad, speaking of going nuts. 5 mana for this 2/2 with Ascend. So at the beginning of each upkeep, we get a 1/1 sapling token. If we have 10 or more permanents on the battlefield, those saplings get +2/+2. And of course, because we're spitting out at least 1 sapling a turn, we'll always have that Anthem effect on our sapling tokens. Trophy Mage is the one creature that Volo cannot double up on, but it's fine because we want to get our Twinning Staff with this. Trophy Mage lets us go get a 3-drop artifact. Twinning Staff is a 3-drop artifact. It can also get us our Replicating Ring or our Lifecrafter's Bestiary. It can get us our Portal of Sanctuary, and it can get us our Crystal Shard. So we have a lot of excellent targets for the Trophy Mage. So that's why I chose to run it here, in spite of the lack of synergy with Volo himself. Speaking of things that don't necessarily synergize with Volo, Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath. We're going to have to sack them, that's fine. We're going to get our triggers. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, gain 3 life, draw a card, put a land from our hand onto the battlefield. And obviously, as long as we've got Volo out, we can do this multiple times. When Uro finally escapes from our graveyard, it is cast from the graveyard. So, with Volo out, we can escape it, keep the real deal, sacrifice the token, but still get all of the value. Wall of Blossoms, a simple 2-drop 0/4 that when it enters the battlefield, draw a card. Draw 2 if we have our Volo. And lastly, Wormcoil Engine, which is a Phyrexian worm. And honestly, I only maybe found out in the past like 3-4 days prior to recording this that there was a big Phyrexian creature type update. I hadn't heard anything about it until, I mean, the word has definitely been spread, I just hadn't heard anything about it myself until I was building this deck and I realized, hey wait, I actually had 4 Phyrexians in the deck. So, if you're building your deck, watch out for that Phyrexian creature type. They've added it to 200 something creatures. And obviously they're not all playable here, but I had to change up the creatures that I was using myself because there were so many changes to those creatures. But let's focus on the Wormcoil Engine himself. 6 mana for a 6/6, Death Touch and Lifelink. Classic commander card. With Volo, we get 2 of these, and then, of course, they die and fall apart into even smaller, but even just as deadly worms. With Death Touch and or Lifelink. Enchantments, only running 2. We're running Elemental Bond, which lets us draw a card whenever a creature of power 3 or greater enters the battlefield under our control. And Grux Uprising, same thing, but 4 or greater. Power 4 or greater. If we already have a creature of power 4 or greater when we cast this, we get to draw a card, and creatures we control gain trample. Great synergies. 5 instants, including Arcane Denial, a little bit of counter magic. Heroic Intervention to protect us and our board. Quandrix Command. Very flexible spell. For 3 mana, we choose 2 of the 4 modes, and they're all pretty good. Return a creature or planeswalker to its owner's hand. Counter an artifact or enchantment spell. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature. Or have a player shuffle up to 3 cards from their graveyard into their library. This can actually mess up a lot of things over the course of a game, so I'm happy to run it. Return to nature, of course. Pop an artifact, pop an enchantment, or exile a Grey Merchant from a graveyard. If you see a Grey Merchant of Asphodel in a graveyard, exile it. Second Harvest, to copy all of the tokens that we have. So for each token we control, okay, create a token that's a copy of that permanent. So obviously we're copying our creatures thanks to Volo's ability. Therefore, we're going to have tokens that this will double us up on. 36 lands, including the Bark Channel Pathway, Breeding Pool, a Command Tower, Evolving Wilds, Fabled Passage. We're running the Faceless Haven. Do not have, if you're going to be casting creature spells on your turn, don't have this active yet. This is more of a back pocket. We need a extra blocker or whatever. This is just a back pocket card that happens to be Snow. Lejara Mirror Lake. Kaltime gave us some interesting lands with very expensive activations, but they do really cool things. In this case, the activation is essentially 6 mana. 5 actual mana plus sacrificing this land to create a token that's a copy of a creature we control. The Mouth of Renome. About a third of our deck is Snow, so why not run it? Pay a Snow and 4 generic, and sacrifices deal 4 damage to a creature. So, sneaky piece of removal in our mana base. Reliquary Tower, because we are drawing some cards. The Rimewood Falls. Scrying Sheets. We could look at the top card of our library. If it's Snow, we can put it into our hand. So, potential card draw. Don't consider this reliable card draw. This is just a place to dump our mana if we just happen to have a little extra somewhere. Shimmer Drift Veil is a snow land. We can choose the color of mana this produces. Running 11 snow-covered forests and 11 snow-covered islands. Terramorphic Expanse, a Yavimaya Coast. That rounds out our 36 lands. A single Planeswalker and Kiora BMF Beckoner. Does two cool things for us. The -1 untaps a permanent. That includes lands and mana rocks. Or if we attack with something, we can untap a creature and have a big blocker. This lets us also draw cards whenever we have a creature of power 4 or greater enter the battlefield under our control. 9 sorceries, including the Curse of the Swine. Allows us to exile X creatures and turn them into boars. Farseek, of course for the ramping. Full Flowering. Populate X times. This is a piece of spice, isn't it? If we've got a few tokens lying around, pay 3 mana, get 1 copy of each. Pay 5 mana, 2 copies of each. 7 mana, 3 copies of each. It's insane. Into the North, we're running snow lands, so why not go get one with Into the North. Nature's Lore, go get a forest card. We have a couple of dual lands that have forest and island types, so Nature's Lore helps us with that. Rampant Growth gets us a basic. Shamanic Revelation, another card draw spell, has the added bonus of gaining us life for each creature we control with power 4 or greater. 3 visits. Search our library for a forest, put it onto the battlefield. You find a Cursed Idol, just the second piece of artifact and enchantment removal. Although we could also use it to create a treasure token and venture into the dungeon. The mode is there if we need it. And that is my take on Volo. Like I said, this was a fun one to build and a fun little thumbnail to put together. One more Forgotten Realms Commander coming up, actually. So Volo I did not build on paper. Minsk I did. And so the next one is going to be Minsk. I'm looking forward to bringing that one for you. Until then, enjoy the rest of enjoy your weekend. Bye for now.